When a billionaire CEO appears at her janitor's apartment door at 5 a.m. wearing an emerald suit jacket and a shattered expression, you know everything is about to change. But for whom? The woman who built an empire on absolute control, or the single father who survived by staying invisible? What happens when the person you've worked hardest to avoid seeing you becomes the only person who truly does? This is the story of the one sentence that shouldn't have been spoken, and changed everything. If you want to know how a pre-dawn confession transformed fear into courage, stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. The knock came at exactly 5:02 a.m. Not a tentative tap. Not the rhythmic pattern of a neighbor. 3 deliberate strikes against the hollow door that cut through the silence like a judge's gavel demanding order. Gerald McCall's eyes snapped open in the darkness of his cramped bedroom, his body already flooding with adrenaline. For 3 seconds, he lay completely still, his breath suspended. In 12 years of single fatherhood, he'd learned one immutable truth: nothing good arrived at 5 o'clock in the morning. Early knocks meant school emergencies, overdue bills delivered by hand, landlords with eviction notices, or worse. He threw back the thin comforter and moved silently down the narrow hallway of his 2-bedroom apartment, his bare feet making no sound on the worn carpet. He paused outside the second bedroom, listening. Through the half-open door, he could hear David's slow, steady breathing. Still asleep. The kid had school in 3 hours. Relief lasted exactly 2 seconds before the knocking came again. Sharper this time. More urgent. "Hold on," Gerald muttered, his voice gravelly from sleep. He was wearing an old undershirt and sweatpants, his graying hair disheveled. His hand found the doorknob, then hesitated. Through the peephole, he could see a figure in the dim hallway light, but the features were blurred, distorted by the cheap lens. Every survival instinct he'd honed over years of paycheck-to-paycheck living screamed at him. This was not the kind of neighborhood where surprise visitors at dawn brought opportunities. This was the kind of neighborhood where you kept your head down, your door locked, and your expectations low. "Who's there?" he called through the door, keeping his voice firm but quiet. David didn't need to wake up to this, whatever this was. There was a pause. Then a voice came through the wood, one he recognized instantly despite never having heard it sound like this. Stripped of its usual precision. Raw. Almost fragile. "It's Alvina LaRue." Gerald's mind went blank for a full heartbeat. Alvina LaRue. His boss. Not his supervisor, his CEO. The woman whose decisions affected thousands, whose office he cleaned every Thursday night while she worked late, always pretending he didn't exist. The woman whose presence in the executive hallway made vice presidents check their phones and straighten their ties. What in God's name was she doing at his apartment at 5 in the morning? His hands moved on autopilot, turning the deadbolt, pulling the door open. The woman standing on his dingy landing looked like someone had taken Alvina LaRue and run her through a nightmare. Her dark hair, usually pinned in that severe, elegant style, fell loose past her shoulders in waves that looked like they'd been gripped and released 100 times. Her makeup, and Alvina LaRue always wore makeup, flawless and understated, was smudged beneath eyes that were red and swollen. She wore that emerald green jacket he'd seen her in earlier that evening, the one that probably cost more than 3 months of his salary, but it hung crooked on her frame. Her designer heels dangled from 2 fingers as if she'd forgotten she was holding them. But it was her eyes that stopped his breath. Those sharp, analytical eyes that could identify inefficiency in a quarterly report from across a conference room, that could freeze an executive mid-sentence with a single glance. They looked hollow. Desperate. Haunted by something Gerald couldn't name but recognized on an instinctive level. "Ms. LaRue," he managed, too stunned to process protocol. "What, are you hurt? Is something wrong?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she seemed to study him, taking in his worn clothing, the warm yellow glow of the single lamp he'd left on in the living room, the small framed photo of David visible on the wall behind him. Her gaze caught there, lingering on an image of his son grinning at the camera in his Little League uniform, gap-toothed and proud. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the hum of the hallway's fluorescent light. "Can I come in?" Every rational neuron in Gerald's brain fired warning signals. This was the CEO. A woman so far above his position that their professional relationship consisted of her pretending he didn't exist while he emptied her trash and wiped down her conference table. Letting her into his home at 5 a.m. was the kind of choice that ended with termination paperwork and unemployment applications. This was the kind of decision that put his stability, his son's security, his entire carefully constructed life at risk. But the rational part of his brain wasn't the part that made him step back and pull the door wider. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "Come in." Alvina LaRue walked past him, and he caught the scent of expensive perfume layered over something sharper. Wine, maybe. Or whiskey. She moved into his small living room with hesitant steps, each one so different from the confident stride that echoed through the executive floor. She stopped in the center of the space, turning slowly, taking it in as if she'd stepped into a museum exhibit of a life she'd only read about. Gerald closed the door with a soft click and followed her, acutely aware of how his apartment must look to someone who likely lived in one of those glass tower penthouses downtown. The furniture was second-hand but clean, purchased piece by piece from thrift stores and yard sales. The walls were covered with David's school artwork and family photos rather than art prints. A stack of folded laundry sat on the couch. He'd meant to put it away before his shift, but exhaustion had won. The silence stretched between them, thick and charged with questions neither seemed ready to ask. Then Alvina LaRue turned to face him fully. Her emerald jacket caught the lamplight. Her hands were trembling. And when she spoke, her voice cracked on the single sentence that would change everything. "I don't know who I am anymore." For a moment, Gerald could only stare at her. The words hung in the air between them, so raw and unexpected that they seemed to physically occupy the space. This was Alvina LaRue. The woman who had stood before shareholders and announced a hostile takeover with the emotional temperature of someone ordering coffee. The woman whose Wikipedia page described her as unflinching and formidable. And she was standing in his living room at 5 in the morning, falling apart. "Ms. LaRue," he started, then stopped. Every possible response felt inadequate. Do you want to sit down?" She nodded, a jerky movement that looked nothing like her usual measured gestures. He guided her toward the small kitchen table, the only clear surface in the apartment. She sank into one of the mismatched chairs, setting her heels on the linoleum floor with a soft thud. Gerald moved on instinct, filling the electric kettle and pulling down 2 mugs from the cabinet. His hands were steady, which surprised him. Years of night shifts had taught him to function through exhaustion and confusion. Tea. He could make tea. That was something concrete. "I shouldn't be here," Alvina said suddenly. Her voice was steadier now, but still fractured around the edges. "This is inappropriate. This is, God, what am I doing?" "You're having tea," Gerald said quietly, spooning instant coffee into one mug and a tea bag into the other. "That's what you're doing right now." She laughed, a hollow sound. "I just signed a merger worth $200 million. I negotiated it for 3 months. Every lawyer, every board member, everyone said it was the smartest move LaRue Industries has ever made." She paused. "The papers were finalized 4 hours ago." Gerald poured hot water into both mugs, set hers in front of her, and sat down across the table. He wrapped his hands around his own mug, waiting. "I got back to my penthouse," she continued, staring into the tea as if it held answers. "Poured a glass of wine. Sat on my balcony overlooking the city. And I felt absolutely nothing. Not pride. Not relief. Nothing." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "Do you know what it feels like to win everything you fought for and feel nothing? Gerald didn't answer immediately. He thought about the night David was born, how he'd held his son for the first time in a hospital room, knowing the mother had already decided to leave, knowing he was alone. He thought about the moment he'd realized he would do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep that child safe. "I know what it feels like to fight for something real," he said finally. "And I know what it feels like when you realize the fight is all you have left." Alvina's eyes glistened. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. "I called my father. He built LaRue Industries from nothing. I wanted to tell him about the merger, about how I'd multiplied his legacy." Her voice dropped. He answered on the third ring. Asked if everything was all right with the company. When I told him about the deal, he said, "Good. Send me the briefing," and hung up. The kettle clicked off. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. "I got in my car," Alvina whispered. "I drove. I didn't know where I was going. And then I saw your window. That light. The one that's always on when I leave the office late." She met his gaze. "You're always there, Gerald. 4:30, 5 in the morning. Working. Living. And I thought maybe someone who gets up that early knows something I don't." Gerald felt something shift in his chest, a dangerous warmth he couldn't afford. "Ms. LaRue." "Alvina," she interrupted. "Please. Just for right now, just in this kitchen, can I be Alvina?" He nodded slowly. "Alvina." The name felt strange in his mouth, too intimate. "I get up early because I have to. Because my son needs breakfast before school and I need to be home when he wakes up. There's no philosophy. It's just survival." "But it's survival for something," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Everything I've survived has been for more. More revenue, more market share, more control. And tonight I realized I don't even know what I'm controlling anymore." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "You clean my office every Thursday. You've seen me working at 11 p.m., midnight, 2 in the morning. Do you know what I'm always working on?" "Reports," Gerald said carefully. "Projections." "Numbers," Alvina corrected. "Always numbers. Never people. Never life." She looked around his small kitchen, at the crayon drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets, at the school calendar marked with David's basketball games. "When was the last time you put something on your calendar that wasn't about obligation?" Gerald thought about it. His calendar was color-coded. Blue for work shifts. Red for David's school events. Green for bills due. There was no other color. "That's what I thought," Alvina said softly, reading his silence. "We're both running, Gerald. You're just running towards something. I'm just running." The words settled over them like dust. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, the first gray hints of dawn creeping through the kitchen window. In 2 hours, David would wake up. In 3 hours, Gerald would need to be on the bus to his day cleaning job. In 4 hours, Alvina LaRue would need to be in her office, commanding her empire. But right now, in this small kitchen, they were just two people who didn't know how to stop running. And that terrified Gerald more than anything else. Alvina took a slow sip of tea, and Gerald watched her shoulders drop slightly, as if the simple warmth gave her permission to breathe. She set the mug down carefully, tracing its rim with one finger. "I was 21 when my father had his first heart attack," she said quietly. "He called me from the hospital. Not to tell me he was scared. Not to say he loved me. He told me the quarterly reports were in his desk drawer, and I needed to present them to the board in his absence." Gerald stayed silent, sensing she needed to speak more than she needed a response. "I stood in front of 12 men, all of them twice my age, and I presented those numbers like my life depended on it. Because it did. My father's legacy depended on it. Our family name depended on it. She looked up. Do you know what one of them said to me afterward? Gerald shook his head. He said, "You're just like your father. Cold as ice, sharp as steel." Her laugh was bitter. I was so proud. I thought that was the greatest compliment I could receive. You were surviving, Gerald said. I was disappearing, Alvina corrected. I built this version of myself that could withstand anything. Hostile takeovers. Gender discrimination. Market crashes. I built Alvina LaRue, the CEO. And somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was before I became her. She stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. 3 steps one way. 3 steps back. Her bare feet made soft sounds on the linoleum. My father recovered. Came back stronger. And I'd proven myself, so he gave me more responsibility. More pressure. More expectations. She stopped, gripping the edge of the counter. When he stepped down 5 years ago and named me CEO, I thought that was it. I'd arrived. I'd won. But you hadn't, Gerald said quietly. No. Alvina's voice cracked. Because winning meant keep winning. Every quarter. Every year. Every merger, every acquisition, every expansion. There was no finish line. There was only more. She turned to face him. Do you know what I did on my 40th birthday last month? Gerald waited. I worked. 16 hours. Came home to an empty penthouse. Ordered takeout. Fell asleep reviewing contracts. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't have friends, Gerald. I have business associates. I don't have hobbies. I have networking events. I don't have a life. I have a calendar managed by 3 assistants who schedule everything in 15-minute increments. The pain in her voice was so raw it felt invasive to witness. Gerald found himself standing, closing the distance between them without conscious thought. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining the space but offering presence. Tonight, when I signed that merger, Alvina continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, I looked at the lawyers and bankers congratulating me. And I realized none of them knew me. They knew my reputation. My track record. My net worth. But not one person in that room could tell you what I care about. What I dream about. What keeps me awake at night beyond quarterly projections. What does keep you awake? Gerald asked. Alvina met his eyes, and something vulnerable and terrifying passed between them. The fear that I've wasted my entire life chasing something that doesn't exist. The fear that I'm 40 years old and I've never been truly known by another human being. The fear that when I die, my obituary will list my accomplishments and not a single person will be able to say they loved me. The words hung in the air, devastating in their honesty. I see you, Alvina said suddenly. Every Thursday night when you clean my office. You always have this photo in your wallet. It falls out sometimes when you're pulling out your building access card. A little boy. Your son, I assume. Gerald nodded stiffly. You look at it, she continued. Every time. Just for a second. Like you're reminding yourself why you're there. Like he's your anchor. Her voice broke. I don't have an anchor, Gerald. I have a company. And tonight I realized a company can't love you back. Gerald felt something in his chest tighten painfully. This was dangerous territory. This vulnerability, this rawness. He should say something professional, something that re-established boundaries. He should remind her that sunrise was coming, that the real world was waiting. Instead, he heard himself say, his name is David. He's 12. And yes, he's my anchor. He's my whole world. Alvina smiled, sad and genuine. You're lucky. I'm terrified, Gerald corrected. Every single day. Terrified I'll lose my job. Terrified I won't be enough for him. Terrified that one mistake will cost us everything. He paused. But at least I know what I'm fighting for. That's more than I have, Alvina whispered. The kitchen fell silent again. Outside, the dawn was strengthening, painting the walls in soft gray light. Somewhere in the building, someone's alarm began to ring, muffled through the walls. The real world, demanding their attention. But neither of them moved. And Gerald realized, with a sinking sense of inevitability, that something had shifted between them in this small kitchen. Something that couldn't be unshifted. Something that would change everything that came after. Maybe you're feeling it too, that pull of a story that asks impossible questions about what we sacrifice to survive, and whether survival is enough. If this is resonating, stay with me. We're just getting to the part where everything becomes undeniable. Alvina moved back to the table and sat down heavily, as if the confession had drained something essential from her. Gerald returned to his chair across from her, cradling his cooling coffee. Tell me about him, Alvina said. David. Gerald hesitated. Talking about his son to his CEO at 5:30 in the morning felt like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. But something in Alvina's expression, that desperate hunger for connection, made him answer. He wants to be an architect, Gerald said. Not because it's prestigious or lucrative. Because he likes the idea of building spaces where people feel safe. He smiled despite himself. Last month, he spent 2 weeks designing this elaborate treehouse. Drew up blueprints, calculated weight load, everything. We don't have a yard. Don't even have a tree. But he built it on paper like it was the most important project in the world. Did you tell him it was impossible? Alvina asked. No, Gerald said. I told him to keep the blueprints. Maybe someday we'd have that yard. That tree. He paused. Probably won't happen. But I'm not going to be the one who tells him to stop dreaming. Alvina's expression shifted, something painful crossing her features. My father told me to stop dreaming when I was 16. I wanted to study art history. He said it was impractical. That I needed to study business, economics, something useful. She traced the rim of her mug again. I was good at art. Really good. But he was right, it wouldn't have built an empire. Maybe you didn't need an empire, Gerald said carefully. Maybe you needed to be good at something that made you happy. Happiness wasn't the benchmark, Alvina said. Success was. Gerald leaned back in his chair, studying her. In the growing daylight, she looked exhausted but more real than he'd ever seen her. The CEO mask had fully crumbled, leaving behind someone who looked lost and human and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Can I tell you what I think about every morning when I wake up? Gerald asked. Alvina nodded. I think about whether David ate enough dinner the night before. Whether his clothes are clean for school. Whether he's struggling with any homework he didn't tell me about. Whether he's being bullied and hiding it. Whether he's happy. Gerald's voice was steady. That's my benchmark. Every decision I make, every shift I take, every dollar I save. It all runs through one filter. Is this making David's life better or worse? That's a small world, Alvina said, but there was no judgment in it. Only curiosity. It's a complete world, Gerald corrected. I'm not building an empire. I'm building a childhood. A foundation. Something he can stand on when I'm gone. Alvina was quiet for a long moment. What if you had more resources? More money? Would you want more? Gerald considered it honestly. I'd want David to not worry about college debt. I'd want to take him on a real vacation, not just day trips to the free museum. I'd want him to feel secure. He paused. But I wouldn't want more work. More pressure. More time away from him. Because then I'd have the resources but I'd miss the childhood. And you can't buy that back. No, Alvina said softly. You can't. She stood again, moving to the kitchen window. Dawn had fully arrived, painting the modest neighborhood in shades of gold and amber. From here, you couldn't see the downtown skyscrapers, couldn't see LaRue Industries' glass tower. It was just small houses and apartment buildings and people beginning their ordinary days. I bought my father's dream, Alvina said to the window. And then I spent 20 years trying to make it bigger, better, more impressive. I thought that's what legacy meant. She turned back to Gerald. But tonight, signing that merger, I realized my father will die knowing his company thrived. And I'll die knowing I made his dream come true. But whose dream was mine? Gerald didn't have an answer for that. He thought about his own life, about the dreams he'd set aside when David was born. He'd wanted to be a teacher once. Had even finished 2 years of community college before the pregnancy, before the abandonment, before survival became the only priority. I don't know if I have dreams anymore either, Gerald admitted. I have responsibilities. And most days, that's enough. Is it? Alvina asked, and there was something in her voice. A challenge. A plea. It has to be, Gerald said. The words settled between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. The kitchen was fully bright now, the secret intimacy of pre-dawn gone. In the bedroom down the hall, Gerald heard David's alarm start to beep. Alvina heard it too. She straightened, and Gerald watched her begin to rebuild herself in real time. The posture strengthened. The expression smoothed. The CEO reassembling herself from scattered pieces. I should go, she said. Probably, Gerald agreed, but neither of them moved. Thank you, Alvina said. For the tea. For listening. For not treating me like I'm, she stopped. Like you're untouchable. Gerald finished. Yes. Gerald stood, moving toward the door. Alvina followed, slipping her heels back on in the living room. With the shoes, she gained 3 inches. The height difference felt symbolic, a reminder of the distance between their worlds. At the door, she paused. Gerald? Yes. Your benchmark, she said quietly. The one about making David's life better. That's not small. That's everything. Then she was gone, disappearing down the dingy hallway, the emerald jacket a flash of color against gray walls. Gerald closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. Behind him, he heard David's bedroom door open. Dad, his son's sleepy voice called. Was someone here? No one important, Gerald lied, and wondered why the words felt so wrong. 3 days passed. Gerald worked his shifts, Thursday night cleaning the executive floor, Friday and Saturday nights on the lower levels. He pushed his cart through LaRue Industries' gleaming hallways, emptied trash bins, vacuumed carpets, wiped down conference room tables. Everything exactly as it had always been. Except he couldn't stop thinking about Alvina LaRue sitting in his kitchen, falling apart. He told himself it was concern. Professional concern. She'd been in crisis, and he'd helped, and that was the end of it. But every time he cleaned her office, he found himself pausing at her desk, looking at the stacks of reports and contracts, wondering if she was okay. Thursday night, he arrived at 10 p.m. for his shift. The executive floor was mostly empty, just a few late-working VPs visible through glass office walls. Alvina's office was dark, door closed. He cleaned it quickly, efficiently, trying not to notice the framed photo on her credenza. Her father, much younger, standing beside a younger Alvina at some corporate event. Both of them unsmiling. He was finishing the conference room when he heard footsteps. He turned, expecting building security. It was Alvina. She stood in the doorway in a navy suit, her hair perfect, her expression controlled. The woman from his kitchen might as well have been a hallucination. "Mr. McCall," she said formally. "Ms. LaRue," he responded, matching her tone. They stared at each other. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a printer beeped. "I need to tell you something," Alvina said finally. She stepped into the conference room and closed the door behind her. Gerald's stomach dropped. This was it. The termination. The HR meeting. The consequences of inappropriate early morning confessions. That night, Alvina said. "I told you I saw your light. That I drove aimlessly and ended up at your apartment." "Yes," Gerald said carefully. "That wasn't entirely true." She moved closer, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "I've been watching you, Gerald." "Not in any concerning way," she added quickly. "But for months. Every Thursday when you clean my office, I've been aware of you. The way you work. The attention to detail. The way you handle everything with care." Gerald's heart was pounding now, though he didn't understand why. "And when I work late," Alvina continued, "sometimes past midnight, past 2 a.m., I look out my window. I can see the residential neighborhood from the 42nd floor. And there's always one light on. Fourth building from the left, third floor. Like clockwork, it comes on at 4:30 every morning." Gerald's mouth went dry. "You watched my apartment?" "I watched that light," Alvina corrected. "I didn't know it was yours at first. But I found myself looking for it. Every late night, every early morning. It became a reminder that someone else was awake. Someone else was working while the world slept." She paused. "Then one Thursday, you dropped your building access card. I picked it up and saw your address on the back. Fourth building from the left." The conference room felt too small suddenly, the walls too close. "3 weeks ago," Alvina said, her voice dropping, "I accessed your employee file. I memorized your address. Your shift times. Your son's name." She met his eyes. "That night, when I drove to your apartment, it wasn't aimless. I knew exactly where I was going. I'd been thinking about it for weeks." Gerald felt like the floor had tilted beneath him. "Why?" "Because you represent something I don't have," Alvina said simply. "Purpose beyond profit. Work that means something. A life built around love instead of obligation." She stepped closer. "Every time I saw that light, I wondered what kind of person got up that early. What they were working toward. Whether they were happy." "I'm not happy," Gerald said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I'm surviving." "You're surviving for David," Alvina countered. "That's more than survival. That's devotion." "And her voice caught. "I wanted to see it up close. To understand what it looked like when someone's life had a center. Because mine doesn't. Mine is all circumference, no core." The confession hung between them, more dangerous than anything that had happened in his kitchen. This wasn't a crisis moment. This was premeditation. Intention. This was Alvina LaRue admitting she'd sought him out deliberately, that she'd seen something in his invisible life worth pursuing. "Ms. LaRue," Gerald started. "I'm not asking for anything," Alvina interrupted. "I'm just telling you the truth. That night wasn't an accident. And what I felt in your kitchen, talking to you, being seen by you, that wasn't an accident either." She backed toward the door. "I needed you to know that. So it would be fair." "Fair for what?" Gerald asked. Alvina's hand found the door handle. "Fair when I admit I want to see you again. Not as CEO and employee. Just as Alvina and Gerald." Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Gerald standing alone in the pristine conference room with his cleaning cart and a truth he had no idea how to process. She'd been watching him. Thinking about him. Seeking him out. And God help him, the most terrifying part was that he wanted to be seen. The weekend was torture. Gerald went through the motions, made David breakfast, helped with homework, watched a basketball game on their small TV, but his mind was elsewhere. In a conference room. In a kitchen. In the space between what was safe and what was wanted. Monday morning, he had to drop supplies at the corporate office for building maintenance. A quick errand. In and out. He'd taken David to school early, had 2 hours before his day's shift at the shopping center downtown. He stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor at 9:15. The hallways were full of people in suits, moving with purpose, speaking in low tones about markets and strategy. He felt acutely visible in his maintenance uniform, pushing a cart of light bulbs and cleaning supplies. He was halfway to the supply closet when he saw her. Alvina was standing with 3 executives outside a conference room, reviewing something on a tablet. She looked every inch the CEO, her hair in that severe twist, her gray suit perfectly tailored, her expression sharp and focused. This was her element. Her kingdom. Their eyes met across the hallway. Everything stopped. The executives kept talking, kept gesturing at the tablet, but Alvina was frozen, staring at Gerald with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hunger. Fear. Recognition. One of the executives said something, pulling her attention back. She nodded, responded, but her body was tense, her movements slightly off. Gerald forced himself to keep walking, to reach the supply closet, to unload the cart. His hands were shaking. This was insane. This was his boss. This was the woman who could destroy his life with a single word to HR. He was loading the last box when he heard footsteps behind him. Mr. McCall. He turned. Alvina stood in the supply closet doorway, alone. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The small room suddenly felt impossibly intimate. Shelves of cleaning products, stacks of paper goods, the smell of industrial soap. And Alvina LaRue, CEO, standing 3 feet away, looking at him like he was air and she'd been drowning. I can't stop thinking about you, she said. Gerald's breath caught. Ms. LaRue. I sat through a board meeting yesterday, she continued, and I couldn't focus. I keep seeing your kitchen. That photo of David on your refrigerator. The way you talked about him, about your benchmark. The way you looked at me like I was just a person, not a position. You are just a person, Gerald said quietly. Not here, Alvina said. Here I'm the CEO. Here I'm untouchable. But in your kitchen, her voice broke. In your kitchen, I was just someone who was tired. And you let me be tired. You didn't need me to be strong or impressive or commanding. You just let me exist. Gerald closed his eyes, fighting against everything he was feeling. This can't happen. I know. I have a son. I have responsibilities. I can't lose this job. I know. You're my boss. This violates every professional boundary that exists. I know, Alvina said again. She stepped closer, and Gerald could smell her perfume, could see the slight tremor in her hands. But I need to tell you something, and then I'll walk away. I'll never mention this again. We'll go back to professional distance and you'll clean my office on Thursdays and that will be enough. What? Gerald asked, even though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Last Tuesday, Alvina said, I stayed late working on a contract revision. You came in to clean at 11 p.m. You thought I couldn't see you through the glass, but I could. I watched you clean my office for 30 minutes. And the entire time, I felt more at peace than I have in years. Not because of anything you said or did. Because you were just there. Working. Existing. Being real in a space that's usually filled with performance and pretense. She took a shaky breath. You said you're surviving. But Gerald, you're the only person in this entire building who's actually living. Everyone else, including me, is just maintaining. And her eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. I'm not winning. I'm just running. I've been running since I was 21, and I can't stop. And the only place I felt permission to stand still was when you were cleaning my office last week. The words hit Gerald like a physical blow. This wasn't attraction. This was something deeper, more dangerous. This was two people recognizing in each other the exact wound they've been trying to hide. I feel it too, he heard himself say, and immediately regretted it. Alvina's eyes widened. What? I feel it, Gerald repeated, the words coming faster now, like a confession he couldn't stop. Every Thursday when I clean your office and you're working late, I find myself taking longer than I need to. Organizing things that don't need organizing. Because being in that space with you, even silently, even invisibly, feels like, he stopped, shaking his head. Like what? Alvina pressed. Like I matter, Gerald finished. Not as a janitor. Not as David's father. Just as myself. Like someone sees me. The supply closet was silent except for their breathing. Outside, phones rang. People passed in the hallway. The ordinary machinery of corporate life continued. But inside this small room, something impossible was crystallizing between them. I can't do this, Gerald said, forcing rationality back into his voice. I have David to think about. If I lose this job, I lose our apartment. Our stability. Everything I've built for him. I would never let that happen, Alvina said immediately. You can't promise that, Gerald countered. If this gets out, if people find out, it doesn't matter what you want. HR will terminate me to avoid liability. You know that. Alvina's face crumpled slightly, the CEO mask cracking. So what do we do? Nothing, Gerald said, even though the word tasted like ash. We do nothing. You go back to being the CEO. I go back to being invisible. And we pretend this conversation never happened. Can you do that? Alvina asked. Can you actually pretend? Gerald looked at her, this brilliant, broken woman who'd shown up at his door at 5 a.m. searching for something she couldn't name. This person who'd built an empire and lost herself in the process. This human being who'd looked at his ordinary, struggling life and seen something worth wanting. No, he admitted. But I have to. Alvina nodded slowly, accepting the truth neither of them wanted to face. She moved toward the door, then paused, her hand on the handle. Gerald? Yes. Thank you for seeing me. Even if nothing else happens, thank you for that. Then she was gone, and Gerald was alone with shelves of cleaning supplies and the devastating knowledge that some doors, once opened, could never quite close again. The days that followed felt like walking through glass. Gerald kept his head down, did his work, focused on David. Basketball practice. Homework. Dinner. The rhythm of survival. But underneath it all was a current of awareness he couldn't shut off. Thursday came. His executive floor shift. He almost called in sick, but he couldn't afford to lose the hours. David needed new shoes. The electricity bill was due. He arrived at 10 p.m. The floor was nearly empty. He started in the conference rooms, working methodically, trying not to think about what had happened in the supply closet 4 days ago. Alvina's office was dark. Relief and disappointment warred in his chest. He cleaned quickly, emptied the trash, wiped down surfaces, vacuumed. Professional. Invisible. Safe. He was finishing when he noticed something on her desk that hadn't been there before. A small envelope with his name on it. Gerald stared at it. Every instinct screamed not to touch it. To leave it there, to pretend he hadn't seen it, to maintain the boundaries they'd agreed to. He picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words in elegant handwriting, "I'm still running." That was all. No signature. No explanation. Just an admission that she couldn't do what they'd agreed to either. That she couldn't pretend. Gerald folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. He finished cleaning the office and left, his hands shaking slightly. The weekend passed in a fog. Monday morning came too fast. He had to deliver paperwork to the executive floor for building management. A simple errand. He timed it for early morning, hoping to avoid the worst of the executive traffic. He stepped off the elevator at 7:45. The hallways were busy but not packed. People clutched coffee cups, reviewed phones, prepared for the day ahead. He was halfway to the management office when he saw her. Alvina was walking toward him from the opposite direction, flanked by 2 executives deep in conversation. She was listening to them, nodding, responding, every inch the commander of her empire. Then she looked up and saw him. The world narrowed to just the 2 of them. 20 feet of hallway. A dozen people moving between them. And something in her eyes that was raw and desperate and entirely unprofessional. She stumbled slightly. Caught herself. One of the executives asked if she was okay. She waved them off, but her gaze never left Gerald's. They were going to pass each other. In 10 seconds, 5 seconds, they would be side by side in this hallway full of witnesses. Gerald's heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. 3 feet. 2 feet. "Mr. McCall," Alvina said as they passed, her voice perfectly professional. "Ms. LaRue," Gerald responded. Their shoulders didn't touch. Their eyes barely met. To anyone watching, it was a standard acknowledgement between CEO and employee. But in that half-second of proximity, Gerald felt the heat of her presence, saw the slight tremor in her hands, recognized the same terrified wanting he felt reflected back at him. Then she was past, continuing down the hallway with her executives, and Gerald was moving forward on legs that felt unsteady. He delivered the paperwork. Got back on the elevator. Went to his day's shift at the shopping center. But all day, all he could think about was that moment in the hallway. The unbearable tension of being so close to someone and not being able to acknowledge what existed between you. The suffocating weight of professional distance when everything in you wanted to close it. That night, David asked if he was okay. "Just tired," Gerald said. "You're always tired," David pointed out. "But this is different. You seem sad." Gerald looked at his son, 12 years old, perceptive, the center of his entire universe. "I'm not sad. I'm just thinking." "About what?" "About a woman I can't have," Gerald thought. "About a connection that threatens everything I've built for you. About the difference between surviving and living and whether I even know anymore which one I'm doing." "Nothing important," he said instead. But that night, lying in bed, Gerald pulled out the note from his pocket and read it again. "I'm still running." So was he. They both were. The question was whether they were running away from something or toward it. And that question terrified him more than anything else. The call came on Tuesday morning. 7:15 a.m., 15 minutes before Gerald needed to leave for his day shift. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. McCall." A woman's voice. Professional. Crisp. "This is Jennifer Park from LaRue Industries Human Resources. Ms. LaRue has requested your presence at an emergency all-hands meeting this morning at 9 a.m. Your attendance is mandatory, and you'll be paid for the hours. Gerald's blood turned to ice. What's this about? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details. Please report to the main auditorium on the second floor by 8:55. Business casual attire if possible. The line went dead. Gerald stood frozen in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear. This was it. The investigation. The termination. Someone had seen something, said something, noticed something. Dad? David appeared in the doorway, backpack on. We need to leave in 10 minutes. Gerald forced himself to function. Got David to school. Called his day shift supervisor to explain he'd be late. Went home and changed into his one decent pair of khakis and a button-down shirt he usually reserved for parent-teacher conferences. He arrived at LaRue Industries at 8:40. The lobby was chaos, employees streaming toward the auditorium, everyone looking confused and anxious. Emergency all-hands meetings were never good news. Gerald found a seat in the back, trying to be invisible among the sea of people in business attire. He recognized a few other maintenance and service staff, all looking equally out of place and nervous. At exactly 9 a.m., the lights dimmed. Alvina LaRue walked onto the stage. She looked immaculate. Charcoal suit. Hair perfect. Expression controlled and unreadable. She moved to the podium with that confident stride, commanding immediate silence from the 700 people packed into the auditorium. Thank you all for coming on short notice, she began, her voice amplified through the sound system. I'm sure you're wondering about the reason for this gathering. I'll be direct. Over the past week, there have been rumors circulating through various departments about the leadership direction of this company. Speculation about my personal life. Questions about my commitment to LaRue Industries. Gerald's heart stopped. His hands gripped the armrests of his seat. I want to address these rumors head-on, Alvina continued, her voice steady. Because at LaRue Industries, we value transparency and truth. And the truth is that some aspects of my personal life have changed recently. Changes that have caused me to reassess my priorities and my role within this organization. The auditorium was dead silent. 700 people holding their collective breath. However, Alvina said, and her eyes swept across the room, pausing for just a half-second on the back row where Gerald sat, these personal changes do not affect my commitment to this company or to each of you. LaRue Industries will continue to operate at the highest level of excellence. Our projects will continue. Our growth will continue. Nothing about our professional trajectory has changed. She paused, taking a breath. What has changed is my understanding of what leadership means. True leadership isn't about sacrificing your humanity for your position. It's about bringing your whole self to the work, including your vulnerabilities and your capacity for growth. Someone in the front row shifted. The sound seemed loud in the silence. I'm sharing this because I believe in leading by example, Alvina said. And the example I want to set is that we are all human beings first, professionals second. Our value is not solely determined by our productivity or our titles. We all deserve lives that include connection, meaning, and the space to acknowledge our limitations. Gerald couldn't breathe. She was doing this. She was publicly acknowledging something had shifted, without naming specifics, without pointing fingers, but still making herself vulnerable in front of her entire company. That said, Alvina continued, her voice sharpening slightly, let me be absolutely clear. Any rumors about inappropriate workplace conduct are false. Any speculation about favoritism or policy violations is unfounded. I have not, and will not, compromise the integrity of this organization. Period. The tension in the room shifted slightly. People started to breathe again. I called this meeting because I believe honesty is better than speculation, Alvina concluded. I'm human. I'm evolving. I'm learning what it means to lead with both strength and authenticity. And I'm asking you to do the same. To show up as whole people. To bring your best selves to this work, but not to sacrifice your humanity in the process. She stepped back from the podium. That's all. Thank you for your time. Return to your regular duties. The lights came up. People began to move, murmuring, processing. Gerald sat frozen, watching Alvina leave the stage, flanked by her executives, disappearing through a side door. She hadn't named him. Hadn't even hinted at specifics. But she'd done something more dangerous. She'd admitted she was changing. She'd acknowledged her humanity. She'd protected him while also refusing to hide. Gerald made his way through the crowd, out of the auditorium, toward the exit. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I promised I'd make it safe. This is step 1. A. He stared at the message. Then deleted it. Then immediately regretted deleting it. Then forced himself to leave the building before anyone could see the expression on his face. Because that meeting hadn't been about company rumors or leadership philosophy. It had been a message. For him. A promise that she was trying to fix the obstacle between them. And God help him, he wanted to believe it was possible. 2 weeks passed. Gerald worked his shifts, avoided the executive floor when possible, tried to focus on David and basketball season, and the ordinary machinery of survival. The all-hands meeting became office gossip, then old news, then forgotten. But Gerald couldn't forget. Every Thursday night, cleaning Alvina's office, he'd find small things. A book on her desk about work-life balance. A photo she'd never displayed before, herself at 8 years old, laughing, covered in paint. Small evidence of someone trying to remember who they'd been before they became what they'd achieved. He never saw her. She stopped working late. Her office was always empty when he cleaned it. Until it wasn't. Thursday night, 3 weeks after the all-hands meeting. Gerald arrived at 10 p.m. to find Alvina's office lit. She was sitting at her desk, but she wasn't working. She was just sitting, staring out the window at the city lights. He should have left. Should have come back later. Should have maintained the distance they'd so carefully constructed. Instead, he knocked on the open door. She turned, and her face transformed. Relief. Grief. Hunger. Everything all at once. Hi, she said. Hi, Gerald responded. I was hoping you'd work tonight, Alvina admitted. I've been here the past 3 Thursdays, but your schedule changed. Supervisor swapped my shift times, Gerald said. He stood in the doorway, not entering, not leaving. Come in, Alvina said. Please. Close the door. Every alarm in Gerald's brain fired. This was dangerous. This was exactly what they'd agreed not to do. He stepped inside and closed the door. Alvina stood, moving around her desk to stand in the middle of the office. I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me, regardless of professional consequences. Gerald's heart was hammering. Okay. That night in my kitchen, Alvina said. And in the supply closet. And in that hallway. Was I imagining what I felt between us? No, Gerald said quietly. You weren't imagining it. Alvina closed her eyes, as if the confirmation was physically painful. I can't stop thinking about you. I've tried. I've dated other people, I've thrown myself into work, I've done everything I can think of to make this go away. But it won't. I know, Gerald said. I feel the same way. Then why are we doing this? Alvina asked, and there was anguish in her voice. Why are we pretending? Why are we staying in these separate boxes when all I want is to she stopped. What? Gerald pressed. What do you want? To know you, Alvina said simply. To talk to you. To have coffee without it being a violation of company policy. To exist in the same space without feeling like we're committing a crime. She moved closer. I want to take David to a basketball game and watch you watch him. I want to cook dinner in your tiny kitchen. I want ordinary things, Gerald. Things I've never wanted with anyone else. Gerald felt something crack open in his chest. You can't have those things. I can't give them to you. Because the moment we cross that line, I lose my job. And I can't afford that. David can't afford that. I know, Alvina said, and tears were streaming down her face now. I know. And I hate it. I hate that my position, the thing I've worked my entire life to achieve, is the thing standing between me and the first real connection I've had with another human being. Then what do we do? Gerald asked. Alvina wiped her face, and when she looked at him, there was determination mixed with the grief. I will fix the obstacle. How? I don't know yet, Alvina admitted. But I will find a way. Because you were right that morning in your kitchen. You said your benchmark was whether your decisions made David's life better or worse. Well, my benchmark has been whether my decisions made the company stronger or weaker. And I'm changing it. I'm choosing a new benchmark. What is it? Gerald asked. Whether my decisions let me live, Alvina said. Actually live. Not just achieve. Not just survive. Live. The words hung in the air between them, a vow and a promise and a risk all tangled together. I need you to wait, Alvina said. I need you to trust me. I'm going to make this right. I'm going to create a situation where there's no obstacle, no power dynamic, no threat to your security. But I need time. How much time? I don't know, Alvina said honestly. But will you wait? Will you give me the chance to fix this? Gerald thought about David. About stability. About the life he'd built through sheer force of will and sacrifice. About what he'd be risking by saying yes. Then he thought about Alvina in his kitchen, falling apart. About her eyes in that hallway. About the way she'd admitted she was running and didn't know how to stop. I'll wait, he said. Alvina's face transformed. She moved forward, and for one breathtaking moment, Gerald thought she was going to touch him. But she stopped just short, maintaining the distance that was all they had. Thank you, she whispered. Then she went back to her desk, and Gerald left the office, and they both went back to their separate worlds. But something had been promised between them. Something neither of them could take back. And Gerald realized, walking out of the building into the cool night air, that he'd just agreed to bet everything on the impossible. Alvina LaRue sat in her penthouse overlooking the city, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside her. It was 2 a.m. below. The streets were empty except for the occasional taxi and late-night wanderer. The city that never quite slept but sometimes dozed. She'd been sitting here for 3 hours, a single document open on her laptop. The document that would change everything. Transitional Leadership Plan, LaRue Industries Executive Restructuring. The words blurred together. She'd rewritten it 6 times. Each version said the same thing in slightly different corporate language. She was stepping down as CEO. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. Board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Hope you're prepared to present Q4 projections. Alvina stared at the message. Her father. The man who'd built LaRue Industries from nothing. The man whose approval she'd spent 40 years chasing. The man who measured love in quarterly earnings and legacy in market share. She could picture his reaction when she presented this restructuring plan. The disappointment. The anger. The cold assessment that she was throwing away everything he'd built. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. She could type back, "Yes, I'm prepared." She could present those Q4 projections. She could keep being CEO Alvina LaRue, running her empire, winning every battle except the one that mattered. Instead, she set the phone down and returned to the document. The fear was suffocating. Not fear of losing the title, though that was real. Fear of failing at something else. Fear that she'd restructure her entire life for the possibility of connection and discover she was too broken for it. Fear that Gerald would realize she was too damaged, too corporate, too much work. Fear that her father was right. That business was all she was good at. That humanity was a luxury she'd sacrificed too long ago to reclaim. But then she thought about Gerald's kitchen. The photo of David on the refrigerator. The way Gerald had looked at her not as CEO but as a person who was tired and lost and desperately in need of permission to stop running. She thought about that night she'd admitted she'd been watching his light. The way his face had transformed when she'd said she'd felt at peace in his presence. She thought about what he'd said, "Your benchmark, the one about making David's life better, that's not small. That's everything." Alvina opened a new browser window and pulled up David McCall's school records. She had access through the company's community partnership program. LaRue Industries sponsored the district's after-school activities. David was a good student. BS and AS. Active in basketball. Teacher notes described him as kind, thoughtful, sometimes quiet. One note from last year caught her eye. David mentioned his father works multiple jobs. He seems very aware of his family's financial pressures but doesn't let it affect his engagement with peers. Gerald was raising a good human. Not just surviving. Actually raising someone with empathy and awareness and resilience. And she'd built an empire. But what had she actually created? Shareholder value. Market dominance. A legacy that would be measured in economic impact but not human connection. What would her obituary say? Alvina LaRue, CEO, increased company valuation by 800%. Survived by her quarterly reports. The thought was devastating. She returned to the restructuring document and began to type. Not corporate language this time. Real words. "I built this company into what it is because I was taught that professional success was the only success that mattered. I sacrificed relationships, personal development, and emotional health in service of growth metrics. I'm proud of what LaRue Industries has accomplished. But I'm not proud of what I've become. I'm choosing to step back from the daily operational role of CEO to create space for a personal life I've never prioritized. This is not weakness. This is not failure. This is choosing to be a whole human being instead of just a title." The words sat on the screen, terrifyingly honest. Alvina saved the document. Then she opened her calendar and found the next board meeting. Friday. 2 days away. She would present the restructuring plan. She would announce she was stepping into an executive chairman role, still involved, still influential, but not running daily operations. She would appoint a successor from within, someone she'd been mentoring for years. She would dismantle the obstacle that stood between her and Gerald. And then she would find out if she was capable of the thing she'd never learned how to do. Be someone's partner. Be present. Be enough without her title. The fear was still there. Massive. Suffocating. But underneath it was something else. Something small and fragile but growing stronger. Hope. Alvina stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, in a modest apartment, a light would come on in about 2 hours. Gerald would wake up, make coffee, and prepare breakfast for his son. And she wanted to be the kind of person who could share that ordinary, precious morning routine. Not as CEO. Not as a billionaire. Just as Alvina. She picked up her phone and sent a text to her assistant. Schedule a company-wide address for Friday afternoon. Main auditorium. Mandatory attendance for all executive leadership. 1 hour. Then she closed her laptop and went to bed. In 2 days, she would make the most important decision of her life. Not for shareholders. Not for legacy. Not for approval. For the possibility of finally standing still. Friday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Gerald had received another text from HR, mandatory attendance at a company-wide address, second floor auditorium, 3 p.m. His day's shift ended at 2:30. He'd have just enough time to make it. He told himself it could be about anything. Budget announcements. Strategic initiatives. Corporate restructuring that had nothing to do with him. But he knew. Somehow, he knew this was Alvina keeping her promise. The auditorium was packed again, all executive leadership, department heads, and a selection of staff from every level. Gerald found a seat near the back, his heart hammering against his ribs. At exactly 3 p.m., Alvina walked onto the stage. She looked different. Still professional, navy suit, hair perfect, but something in her posture had changed. She stood at the podium without notes, without a tablet, just herself and her voice. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I know these company-wide addresses have become more frequent lately, and I appreciate your patience. What I'm about to share will affect the future direction of LaRue Industries, and I wanted you to hear it directly from me." The room was silent. 23 years ago, Alvina said, I stood before a board of directors and promised them I would dedicate my life to making this company the industry leader. I was 21 years old. My father had just had a heart attack. And I believed the measure of my worth was how successfully I could build his legacy. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. I kept that promise. LaRue Industries has grown from a mid-sized regional firm to a national powerhouse. Our market value has increased 800%. We've acquired 17 companies. We employ over 4,000 people. By every business metric, I've succeeded. Gerald's hands gripped the armrests of his seat. But success has a cost, Alvina continued, and her voice was quieter now, more personal. And the cost I paid was learning to be human. I became so good at being CEO that I forgot how to be anything else. I measured my life in quarterly reports. I defined my identity by my title. I let my entire existence narrow down to a single role. She took a breath. Until recently, I believed that was enough. That professional achievement could substitute for personal fulfillment. That power and control were adequate replacements for connection and vulnerability. The room was absolutely still. 700 people are barely breathing. I was wrong, Alvina said simply. And I'm standing here today to make a choice I should have made years ago. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of LaRue Industries. A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. Gerald's vision tunneled. I'm not leaving the company, Alvina clarified, raising a hand to quiet the murmurs. I'm transitioning to the role of executive chairman. I will remain on the board, provide strategic guidance, and maintain oversight. But I will no longer be responsible for daily operations. She pressed a button, and a slide appeared on the screen behind her. Michaela Torres, our current Chief Operating Officer, will assume the role of CEO. Michaela has been with LaRue Industries for 11 years. She understands our mission, our values, and our goals. She's ready for this challenge. And I'm confident she'll lead this company to even greater success. The screen changed to show an organizational chart. Alvina's name moved to the top, but with clear separation from daily operations. This restructuring accomplishes several things, Alvina explained. It ensures continuity of leadership while allowing for a fresh operational perspective. It enables me to focus on long-term strategy rather than quarterly firefighting. And, she paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was raw with emotion. And it allows me to reclaim something I lost decades ago. My humanity. Gerald couldn't breathe. She was actually doing it. She was dismantling the obstacle. She was choosing possibility over power. I'm making this decision because I've learned something crucial, Alvina said. True wealth isn't measured in market share or stock price. True wealth is measured in the people who know you. The connections that define you. The life you build that exists beyond your title. Her eyes found Gerald's in the back row. Just for a moment. Just long enough. I want to be someone who exists outside of work hours and executive meetings, Alvina continued. I want to have conversations that don't end with action items. I want to build relationships based on who I am, not what I've achieved. And I can't do that while running a company that demands every hour of every day. She stepped back from the podium slightly. This isn't giving up. This isn't failure. This is choosing to be whole. And I'm hoping that by making this choice publicly, some of you will feel permission to examine your own lives and ask whether you're running towards something or just running. The silence in the auditorium felt sacred. Michaela will assume the CEO role on Monday, Alvina concluded. I'll be available for consultation and transition support. But I'm choosing to step back. To create space for a life that includes more than professional victories. To become the kind of person who can show up as fully human, not just fully productive. She looked directly at Gerald again. That's all. Thank you for 11 years of extraordinary work. Thank you for building this company with me. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the strongest choice is admitting you can't do it all alone. She walked off the stage to stunned silence, then slowly building applause. People stood. The ovation grew. Whether they understood all the implications or not, they recognized courage when they saw it. Gerald remained seated, his whole body shaking. She'd done it. She'd actually restructured her entire life, given up the daily power of her title, removed the obstacle that stood between them. His phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number. The obstacle is gone. The choice is yours now. Coffee tomorrow morning. There's a place near your apartment. 8 a.m. A. Gerald stared at the message. This was it. The moment when he had to decide if he was willing to bet everything on the impossible. If he was willing to risk the comfortable safety of invisibility for the terrifying possibility of being seen. He thought about David. About the example he was setting. About whether he wanted to teach his son that survival was enough or that sometimes, life demanded the courage to reach for more. He typed back, I'll be there. Then he left the auditorium and walked out into the late afternoon sun, feeling like the world had just tilted on its axis. And for the first time in 12 years, Gerald McCall wasn't running away from something. He was running toward it. There are moments in life when everything changes, not because circumstances force it, but because someone finally chooses courage over comfort. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own benchmarks, I'd be grateful if you'd share it. Leave a comment about what success means to you. And if you want more stories about people choosing the hard, beautiful path toward actually living, subscribe. Some stories need to be told. Some stories need to be shared. This is one of them.